students came to me. 5 Muslim students in the audience, they came to me and said, we'd like to come to you, Dr. Pandit, at the church here. So that's a great opening. And people were keen on buying the books. And so it was a real eye-opener for the kids. And so the presentation was totally neutral. And that's what the kids loved. Dr. Pandit presented evidence. And so tonight we start our training session. If you haven't registered, you still this time. We have about, 100 registered for the training session, 18 to the 23. Dr. Pandit will go through the same things that he presents all over the world. He's just come back from Germany. And you'll have an opportunity of going through the training through small segments and get little chunks of it, and then we'll rehearse and we'll go into small groups and practice and ask the important questions the world is asking outside of the church. They're very, very important questions that the world is asking. We always ask the Adventist questions, in a little circle, in a little bubble, and we know how to split the hairs and the rest of it. But when we get out there, we are totally trapped, a question. And so tonight at 7 o'clock we start, and it goes till Thursday, 18 to the 23rd. So if you still want to come over, it only costs $10. And if you cannot afford, we'll try and subsidize you. So $10, you get a little notebook, and you get Dr. Pandit's book also for the seminar. Without any further ado, Steve's going to be our presenter. He's willingly accepted to do this 2 weeks. And next week, the next 4 weeks, some very important presentations that are coming up. And the presentations is why our young people are leaving the church. Why young people are leaving the church. And Dr. Pandit just sent me a stats this week, and he's spoken in schools and Adventist schools, I think, where 70% of the kids don't know or don't have an encounter with God or don't know God. 70% of Adventist kids in Adventist schools. Isn't that shocking? A shocking stat, And so we've got some job to do. And so we're going to be talking about that on the next 4 weeks. There's some professors that gone to General Conference and presented some papers, and they presented the problems. But after those presentations, probably next fall, we'll try and look for some solutions right here on this campus. What can we come up with? There's plenty, everyone's saying, this is the problem, this is the problem, this is the problem, but nobody's giving us the solutions for the young people. And so let's find out and brainstorm ourselves if we can come up with some solutions that we could send nationally around the country and around the world. And so, and that's what the class is for, so we can be creative. Let's bow our heads as we pray. Gracious Father in heaven, we thank you, dear God, that we could come into your presence this morning. We thank you for the beautiful week. We thank you for the traveling mercies. We thank you for our lovely families. And dear God, I ask you to bless Steve this morning. May you anoint him with words from on high. And as we have the discussion, may, Lord, just not be academic, but that we will take it deep down in our hearts, and that you would create in us a desire to share the gospel of Jesus Christ. Bless us now, Lord, and we ask the presence of the Holy Spirit to be with us. In Jesus' precious name, amen. Welcome, Steve.
Okay, good morning again. What I want to do, I got a lot of information. I didn't give a handout today, but we're going to go over a few things that are, pertinent to if you're going to get into any kind of apologetics, and that is worldview and understanding different worldviews, so we'll be able to relate successfully to people. And the current worldview, which is going around right now, known as postmodernism, and talk about that a little bit, and try to tie that in with some general response to it. Can't get too specific because that's just way too involved. So I'll get through what I can this morning with this information, and then we'll take it from there. I first want to start out with worldview. Where does it come from? The philosopher Immanuel Kant, he was the first to use the German term Weltanschauung, and what that means is a way of looking at the world. So it literally means world view. So James Olthius actually put it better, and actually everything I'm going to talk about is based off of James Olthius. He is a scholar and professor of philosophy at the Institute for Christian Studies in Toronto. So he framed it like this: A worldview is a framework or a set of fundamental beliefs through which we view the world and our calling and future in it. This vision need not be fully articulated. It may be so internalized that it goes largely unquestioned. So in other words, it's mostly subconscious in its nature. It may not be explicitly developed into a systematic conception of life. It may not even be theoretically deepened into a philosophy. It may not even be codified into creedal form. It may be greatly refined through cultural, historical development. But nevertheless, this vision is a channel for the ultimate beliefs which give direction and meaning to life. It is the integrative and interpretive framework by which order and disorder are judged. It is the standard by which reality is managed and pursued. It is the set of hinges upon which all of our everyday thinking and doing turns. So in short, everybody has a worldview. So it's not something you really didn't know, but it's just putting it into terminology because it'll make sense later on when we categorize things. So a worldview is really not what you see, but what you see with. Just a small illustration. Just think of a painting that's put up somewhere. You have the different eyeballs looking at it. One set of eyeballs goes, okay, that's I'm not sure what it is. Got some interesting colors. The next set looks at it. I see the oblivion of man, or just some sort of statement. The next person sees, you know what? I think that's a person that's stuck in the snow. You know, just you can go on and on and on. Then one person says, well, it looks like the painter was painting the ceiling, and that's a drip cloth. Okay? A lot of modern art, they might tend to think that way. Or another person just sees it as, you know, just a collage of interesting colors or whatever. But it's not really what you see. What you see is just some canvas that has some paint on it. But what you see with, that is basically your worldview. And there are just some common elements of a worldview that we all have. Of course, again, it's like Olthius explained, we don't always verbalize this and internalize it, but it's something that sort of comes subconsciously. But if we were to analyze it, it would have these elements. A background theory about the world, a basic diagnosis of the nature of human beings, and a diagnosis of what is wrong. That's a key one. What is wrong with us? And another key, some sort of answer or solution to putting it all right. So the question is not really whether you have a worldview or not, but whether the worldview you have or you live by is a good one. If it's going to be good or valid, it must fulfill three basic criteria. Is it logically consistent? In other words, it should not contradict itself. Are we going to say that we love mankind and then turn around and trample on mankind to get ahead for ourselves? That wouldn't be logically consistent. Is it factual? Do we live by facts, or do we live just by some illusion? Does it adequately explain life? And finally, is it viable? Can it really be lived out in the real world? So those are the main elements of a worldview. It can be poorly developed or highly complex. It can be really off the wall and sarcastic, or it can be very correspondent and coherent. To understand worldviews, that is the ultimate goal of apologetics and any of our personal evangelism, because that is the way we're going to be effectively communicating someone, pointing them in the direction of God. So that's worldview really from an individual sense. But let's look at it from a more of a broad sense so we can get an idea of who we're talking to. Worldviews are basically classified into 4 families. And there are 3 questions which will help us to identify which one of these families someone may belong to. The first question is this: does anything other than the universe or nature exist? That's your first question to find out. A yes response, well, that would put that person in a supernaturalism worldview family. And within the supernaturalism worldview family, there are two major subdivisions. To get to those subdivisions, we will proceed to question 2. Is there only one ultimate and supreme supernatural reality? If you answered yes to this question, you are in the family known as monotheism. If you answered no, you are in the polytheism family. Can anyone think of a good example of a major world view or religion that is in the polytheism family? Hinduism, a major example. How about monotheism? Who else? Islam. Who else? Think close to home. Us. We are in the monotheism family. And that's just a general view. Now, when you want to talk Seventh-day Adventism, you know, that's way down the branches and all the little different trinkets. But they're not going to go there into that depth this morning. Just want you to understand the over worldview families. Now, for those that answered question 1 with a negative response, they would agree that nothing exists outside of the supernatural, outside of the natural world and out of the basic universe that you see. So these worldviews would also fall into the final 2 worldview categories. And for that, we'll ask question 3 to define that, to delineate that line. Question 3 is rather simple. Is nature divine? So if you answered no to this question, you would be in what is known as the metaphysical naturalism family. If you answered yes, nature is divine, you would be in the pantheism family. Can anyone think of a major worldview or religion that is in pantheism? It's a major one, big time. Not Catholic. They would be monotheistic. Well, Hinduism probably would fit that, but the one I was thinking of would be Buddhism. Buddhism would fall under this category. We'll talk about it in more detail so you understand that with further clarity. The metaphysical naturalism family, who do you think that would involve? They think there's nothing but just what you see, the universe. It is what it is, nothing more. No angels. Atheists, correct. I was thinking more in terms of your Darwinists. That's the ones we just spent a whole quarter talking about. Is from that particular worldview family, how to relate to them. Carl Sagan was the one that really put this into perspective with his cosmos. Everything, nothing is, and all that there is the cosmos. That's not his exact words, but that's the way he pretty much had the whole theme of his presentations and his show that he had were. It would also be people like Richard Dawkins, Stephen Hawking, all of those people. They belong to the metaphysical naturalism family. So within these 4 families, even though you use those 3 questions to find out who's where, to understand who you're dealing with, every worldview answers 3 additional questions. Number 1, what is the world like? Number 2, why does the world exist? Starts getting a little more hairy here. And finally, number 3, very pertinent to the whole issue. How do human beings fit into the world? Let's take a look at the metaphysical naturalism family. When we look at question 1, what is the world like? Again, I'm not going to get specific, but in general, their responses are going to be that everything is a material and a physical object moving around in empty space. We're basically matter in motion. And we're all governed under the basic laws of physics. Chemistry, biology, all the other sciences, mathematics, they all basically answer to the law of physics. So everything that's really analytical, data-based, something that you can measure, see, feel, touch, taste, any of the senses, that's pretty much the way the world is like. To an extent, I think that most of us could find some sort of commonality with that. But we go to question 2, to the metaphysical family. Why does the world exist? And here is a lot more static on the radio. The best answer they can come up with, in general now, I'm not talking about someone specifically answering you, is that the world exists just because it does. Because it's there. Because it has to. Ultimately, this worldview has no real answer to this question. It just has to exist. It just is there. Which brings us to question 3. How do human beings fit into this world, according to the metaphysicalist? Humans are the accidental, temporary results of ongoing motions in matter. We're just here by accident. We just happen to be. So therefore, any of the questions you have are irrelevant. So how does this worldview respond? Is it viable? Can it be lived out in the real world? What about the human deep hunger for ultimate meaning? How do you respond to that as a metaphysicalist? Lasting love, eternal fulfillment. But also humans need transcendence. We need something above ourselves. That's just a basic human need. There's something that exists there that just is not responded to with a metaphysical worldview, at least when you're looking at it from those terms. Now let's look at pantheists. When you see question 1, a pantheist, what is the world like? Well, they see the world as divine. It's uncreated and indestructible. It is eternal. It could not possibly exist from nothing. A God couldn't have just existed and made the world. It already was there because it is God. So, from a pantheist point of view, nature is truly the divine entity. But why does the world exist? Well, it exists because, they just simplify it as, it is God. It has to exist. If you have a God, and God is nature, that's it. But how do human beings fit into this world from the pantheist point of view? Well, the world is only God. So if humans really exist, they must be identified with God. Everyone is either a God or just a small fragment of God. They're not separate and distinct individuals, not according to the pantheist. You are God. This is God. Everything is God. Everything that is God. But what about evil? Well, then it gets really, really hairy for them. Well, either God is evil or evil doesn't really exist. And that's going to be the basis of their explanation for things. Did I what now? No, I wasn't. I threw that in. I do that every now and then. Yep. All right. That's going to cover the worldview section I wanted to talk about. Let's fast forward a little bit to what's known as postmodernism. You've heard that term a lot. What exactly are they talking about? Well, that's why you don't really know exactly what it's talking about in those terms, because the term itself is actually vague and overused, and it doesn't really fully identify this particular worldview in such concrete terms. But a handful of general themes do loosely characterize some contemporary thinkers and theories that are classified as postmodern. But before we go into actual postmodernism, we probably need to know what roots it is branching off from. So it follows, if there is a postmodern movement, there would have to have been a what? Modern movement. look at the modern era. When did modernism begin? Of course, there's different debate on this, but ultimately it began with a pivotal event which occurred in 1789. It was the storming of the Bastille. With that event, pretty much ended the age of monarchy. Everybody answers to the king. What do we think? We think like the king. Everybody evolves around the king. Everything that we do is according to that. That age was over pretty much after the Bastille was taken over. And the modern era actually endured all the way up to the fall of the Berlin Wall. Of course, we're talking, very seamless lines here. But if you look at the modern era, you have to look at a few dominant beliefs. What characterized the modern era? And I'm going to read off a few of these. Reason is king. Absolute standards are embraced. Education and knowledge lead to freedom. Man is the center of all things. Progress is the goal of nature and culture. And from a Christian worldview, some of these conclusions of the Enlightenment era, the Age of Enlightenment, modernism, same thing, they're very unwelcome. Take a look at reason is king. Sounds pretty good, but that reason did not involve any outside sources. It was internalized. It's our own reason. We don't need biblical or Christian reasons. So our own reasoning would lead to truth. Absolute standards are embraced. Well, again, it involves the careful use of rationalized philosophies that are pretty much opposed to Christianity or Christian values. Education and knowledge lead to freedom. Freedom. Well, that's supposed to answer all questions. But look at some of the most educated societies that existed for a while. One of those was the Nazis. Look where and they were extremely educated. And look where their education led them. Look what it encouraged them to do. To try to eliminate what they thought was life. This is Hitler's own words. Life unworthy of life. That was basically his viewpoint of Judaism. And not just Jews, but gypsies and unwanted people, the insane. Hitler started killing off people that were mentally incompetent. He did it slowly. But anyway, that's a whole other story. I don't want to go down that road. So when you look at the modern era and its conflict with Christian worldview, and then you see the coming of postmodernism, you can see that maybe some of these differences and problems from the Enlightenment age, many Christians and postmodern philosophers actually find common ground. Another thing about the modern era, a lot of those thinkers that might have been, theists were also deists. And they thought that to be more of a rational theology than the Christian worldview. And deism is basically God created the world, but he left it to kind of go on its own. Occasionally comes by to tweak it. So he's not really involved with us personally. So now this brings us to postmodernism. It crept into the worldview process actually since the late 1800s. Some people try to say it happened in the 60s, right after World War II, and it certainly emerged significantly onto the scene after the Berlin Wall collapsed. That was considered when the postmodernism dominated. But again, when we say postmodernism, we're talking about just thinking in terms of transition. How do we think? How do we view life? What's our worldview? The primary philosopher from these revived ideas was a guy named Friedrich Nietzsche. And he's the one that coined the phrase, God is dead. And he said this rather than to say that he didn't exist. If you say God is dead, you pretty much have atheism. You just have it in a way that says, okay, you can have your belief in God, but he's dead. There are three major postmodernist worldviews which culminate from Nietzsche's theories. There's the denial of a unified and objective truth and reality. Truth is relative to each person and culture. There's the number 2, the repudiation of rationality altogether on the grounds that it is a tool for domination. And number 3, related to Christianity, the criticism of Christian values and virtues as oppressive and dehumanizing. So that's the basic worldview that's going around. And that's the dominant worldview of any non-believer right now that would be classified, if you will, postmodern. Nietzsche believed that many long-held Christian beliefs and values were the byproduct of what someone wanted to be true rather than what was discovered to be true. So the dominant theme of postmodern philosophy states that all theories about the world tell us more about the theorist than it does about the actual world. Okay? So later, the postmodern philosopher, he's more modern, Richard Rorty, he stated it like this: truth is made rather than found. In other words, man's creating truth just for his own purposes. So Christianity is something that we just decided was true, so therefore it is true. The incompatibility between Christianity and postmodern anti-realism can be summarized in the following argument. If Christianity is true, then there is objective truth and reality. Number 2, but there is no objective truth and reality. This is metaphysical anti-realism. Therefore, Christianity is false. So that's our challenge, to respond to that. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the 3 blind men and the elephant story. And most of you have heard this expressed as 3 blind men came up to an elephant, and one grabbed the tail and said, well, this is just some kind of giant rope. And the other one grabbed a tree trunk and said, well, his legs, and said, this is some kind of giant tree trunk. And the other one grabbed the snout and says, well, this is some kind of, extensive hose or something like that. And a lot of people stop right there and they say, well, that's the way the world is. We just have different viewpoints, so let's just live and let live. But what they don't know is that that actual story has another ending to it. And that's very seldom expressed. The ending is this: the Magi, or the king, steps on the porch. He sees what's going on below and says, hey, you foolish blind men, you all don't have something different. You have the exact same thing. Each of you has an elephant. So the point of the story is that man only has glimpses of what is real and what is true. And how is he going to discover it? And if he just defines truth on what he or she has a hold of right then and there, we're not going to really get the whole truth, are we? We would need, therefore, a higher source to tell us. So if we're going to respond to this argument and say that there is no objective truth in reality, we're going to have to somehow point this postmodernist in the direction of someone above ourselves, someone transcendent. And that would be the challenge of dealing with this population. So dealing with postmodernists as Christians. So the summary of postmodern complaints about Christianity is postmoderns are against the rationality of Christian claims. And will not by any stretch follow a universal narrative of the Christian worldview. And they certainly are not going to go for any finality of Christian truths. So to postmodernism, argumentation is manipulation. And there is no single global story, but rather, instead, many local stories. So that's one of the key points you need to understand. They do not go for any kind of global story. They like little local stories. They believe in keeping the conversation going. There is no finality. There is no final truth or the last word. It must continue ad infinitum. It keeps going. And they don't go for anything, especially to make like that with the nature of ultimate reality or the meaning of human life. It's not going to fit into the nice little packages that we've already pre-prepared for them. So as Christians, then dealing with postmodernism, we really need to be aware that many are looking for the answer that fits life. So we can minister in what's known as a dot-to-dot evangelism. And that's our mission, to connect the dots. The postmodern worldview is a life in fragments. The world is blown apart. It's in chaos. There is so much pop culture and news that it's just become non-coherent. It just doesn't fit. But Christians, we believe, have found the center. We found the narrative. We found coherence. So we take the fragments of torn culture and we connect the dots. This takes a lot of patience and a lot of time. So looking at it from a specific, the culture of Seventh-day Adventism, if a postmodernist is not going to take the any kind of finality on it, or certainly a universal narrative, isn't that going to affect what many of us in our church believe is the ultimate witnessing narrative? Do you know what I'm referring to? I'm referring to what we, in our culture, just rolls off our tongue like butter. We say, the great controversy. And that seems to be our ultimate goal. Let's talk about the great controversy. Well, those terms are certainly not going to be accepted whatsoever with the postmodern worldview. It's going to be met with an absolute closed door. And can you see that? I think if you thought about it, you would be able to understand from their point of view, because witnessing is trying to reach out and understand where someone else is. And there really isn't any need, because if you really think about it, great controversy to them says this: oh, someone's still having an argument? Well, you have your argument, and I'm just going to go ahead and live my life. See ya. Shut door. That's pretty much what it says to them. So, I mean, you wouldn't give someone a fur coat and wrapped up in old newspaper. So it's not the concepts we're worried about, great controversy. It's just calling it that, packaging it as such. Instead, connect the dots, make it meaningful to them. So what do I mean by connecting the dots? Again, fragments that are there. They maybe have a piece of the tail, but how does that tail relate to the elephant? So how would you relate Jesus' death to people? That's really more of an apologetic that's appropriate. So think of this. There's a jungle. A man's walking down a path in the jungle. And all of a sudden, a tiger leaps out in front of the man, threatens to kill him. Well, out of nowhere, another man comes off the side and attacks that lion, so that they get into a big fight, and he dies. But the other man that it was originally threatened to be attacked lives. So at the funeral, you can see that the man that died fending off the lion, would be connected with that. But let's say this happened, or this story gets out. The same guy walks out in front of the tiger, and the other guy, instead of jumping out to get the tiger, jumps into a well and drowns. And the tiger just walks off into the woods. So then at the funeral, they say, well, this man died so this other guy could live. You'd say, well, how does that connect? I don't see anything where that connects. Well, that's the way a lot of people view Jesus' death. That Jesus just died in some sort of Roman empirical culture. And he was just judged in that culture. But how does that relate to me? That was, over 2,000 years ago. Can we honestly connect that dot to people? Can we connect Jesus' death to something that's relevant to them? How did Paul go about his evangelism? What was his great technique? We see in Acts 17, 1 through 4, when they had traveled through the Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, and there was a synagogue of the Jews. And according to Paul's custom, he went to them and 3 Sabbaths reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and giving evidence that the Christ had to suffer and to rise again from the dead, and saying, "This Jesus whom I am proclaiming to you is the Christ." So how did Paul relate to culture? Okay, Paul reasoned from the Scripture. And to reason is to say something very thoroughly. He explained to them the concepts. To explain, also in the Greek, means to open up thoroughly. So instead of transferring sound bites and one-liners, he opened up the details of the gospel to them so that they could know the meaning of these concepts. And evidence. He gave this evidence in a logical form. He laid one thing beside another. And some were persuaded. So in the Greek, being persuaded means to be convinced by argument. So it might be true that human argument alone will never yield fruit. It can be said that the human argument is compatible with the Holy Spirit, what it does to lead many people to become Christians. So why in the world would we even witness? To observe cultures and objects of worship, you need to do your homework. Observe carefully. Because that's one thing Paul did. He didn't just go out. He did his homework on everywhere he went. He was observant. He was watching things. He spent the time examining their objects of worship, like when he went into the Acropolis, when he said, "This stone that you are committing to the unknown God," he studied that. He didn't just go in there blindly and he didn't talk at them. He didn't talk to them. He talked with them. And in what he did, he looked for the fundamental inadequacies that they had. So he had to invest a lot of time and effort. So if we're going to be successful, that's what it's going to take. Understanding worldviews, know where they're coming from, so we can relate with them. There's a few other things I probably could have gone over, but let's just we're going to do some discussion questions now. First off, do you think we as individuals should be involved in sharing the gospel with our fellow man? Pretty obvious. Is that yes? Okay. Why? Why us? Right. That's certainly a very big privilege. And he tells us to. That's correct. But would that be effective?
He can.
Why can't he?
He can.
Oh, I thought you said he can't. Okay. And but he also wants us to share, though. Is there anything, pertinent to us sharing it? Go ahead.
Like last night, Dr. Pandit, he mentioned the fact that no one knows, no one has like absolute monopoly on truth. And just like the story of Jonah, how he's encountering with the people on the ship, kind of revealed to him how he was turning away from God in his current state. When like through our interactions with people, yes, we are sharing the truth, but at the same time, through that like exchange, we too, like the Spirit can reveal to us some of our like faults and things that we need to work on ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. People helping people. Yes, Dr. Pandit.
It's multifactorial, actually, why we present it to anybody else. There's one key point that we must never forget. It must be something that is compelling to us. If it is not compelling to us, we must not speak it as a message. So one of the big reasons why we speak to anyone shake us from that. I mean, that's the level of conviction that you come to. And that is the springboard that compels us, like the words of Jeremiah, it's a fire in my bones. In other words, you're not going to say, should we or should we not evangelize? You say, how much can I evangelize? That is
Right.
the question. Not should I not?
Yes. Is to share exactly your experience. There's no question that that would be the ultimate witness. I mean, why, you're right. Why in the world would I tell somebody something I really don't believe in? Because I'm doing it because I feel like it. Yes? Right. Yes, I'm definitely hearing you two speak from a natural, instinctive feeling that something that really is true and something that, okay, time to witness, 3 o'clock. Yes, so it's something real, something that goes beyond just a duty of showing up at work at 8 o'clock. Yes, sir.
I think with our religious experience, I think our sharing of that is natural. As somebody may share with other people about the New York Yankees or
Right.
Amway, whatever it is that they have that deep conviction with, regardless of what it is, we may not feel any kind of aversion, any kind of loyalty to it, but somebody obviously does, and that loyalty coming from within their heart is what compels them to share it with others.
Absolutely, yes. To feel it totally within your heart and your conviction is absolutely going to be the springboard of getting it out there. Yes, Sam.
Can we get too excited and then not convict the person because of our excitement or, there's too much fire in the bones?
Too much fire.
I think your talk is absolutely important because if I don't understand the person's worldview, where he's coming from, then it'll be difficult for me to engage in that person. So I need to know his background so
Yes.
I can set the platform as to how to.
Exactly. And that does a lot of things. It personalizes you, connects you with that person. And that's what I see, the understanding of worldviews with the biggest advantage it has. It doesn't mean you have to know all this stuff that we just went over, memory or anything like that, but just in principle, so that you can, connecting is the whole key. Opening doors is what witnessing is all about. Yes? Yes, you have to be able to connect the dots. That's part of what we're talking about here, is making this relevant to them, so they have something to connect with. What does that mean? Because look at Seventh-day Adventists. We talk about the Sabbath and stuff. Well, how does that connect? Okay, so
Jesus could have told us that yes, our commission is to give them the Bible, give them the Word, let them read. But I think he went a step further. We need to reflect the life of Jesus.
Absolutely.
I think that's what's important.
To reflect that.
Yeah.
I have two over here. Let me go first with Cheryl.
I think part of this is a real deep, genuine interest in what's going on with them in their lives.
Correct.
You're not really interested in, as Christ, with this whole weight of longing to do something good, for each person, and where they're at in their life, and what it is that's interesting them and moving and making them passionate. If you don't have a real interest in everything going on with them, then you don't have. It's not the give and take. It's coming from one.
Right. In other words, you're not talking at somebody, you're talking with them. That's certainly a key. So you're engaging, and that's the whole, that certainly is the key element, engaging. Greg?
I think there are a variety of reasons why God asked us to share, but one is that there is a relational aspect to truth, and it ties in with what Sam was talking about there. possibility of people being converted just by reading something or the printed page, that is valuable. But it's even more powerful when tied in with a committed life. And so if I share whether it's a belief in Jesus' death for my sins or my commitment to the second coming or the Sabbath or whatever, it's one thing for somebody to simply hear my testimony or to read a testimony in God's Word, but it's another thing when they see a life that is lived out in that way, that is committed to God and the rest that He offers on the Sabbath, a life committed to the grace that He offers us in our lives, and on and on. And so truth lived out is a very compelling message.
Correct, correct. Well, let me throw this. What do you think about the effectiveness of generic street preaching evangelism? What do you see is going on there? What do you see that as a good thing, a bad thing, or explain your answer? What do you think about that? You've probably heard it before when you've got gas somewhere and all of a sudden you heard some shouting going on at a street corner. And what do you think about that as a form of evangelism? What do you think? Is that effective? Is that what we're supposed to do? Go ahead, sir.
A thing that just pops up. I was raised atheist, evolutionist, and so whenever I was introduced to Christ, there was this piece before they even mentioned Christ. It was just kind of weird and all that. But anyway, thinking about your question, I just think about how Jesus rebuked whenever the demons were going, "You are the Son of God. You are Christ." And it's like, quiet.
Right.
His witness, whatever he was doing, was revealed who he was. He didn't need demons out there shit. Not what these people do. He didn't
Right.
need demons shouting, "You are the Son of God."
In other words, a little obvious or something like that? Okay.
Well, just as a comment, Jonah went around Nineveh on the street corners hollering, God's going to kill you all in 40 days. So we've got a kind of a balance there. What's the
Right.
Still know like who you're talking to. You still have to know the audience you have.
Exactly. Okay.
Yeah.
I think what we're saying here, the point is, it's definitely impersonal, isn't it? That's one thing you can put about it. Well, who are you talking to? I mean, you're just shouting at everybody. Dr. Pondit?
I don't think you should ever stop any avenue that God might use.
Right.
Therefore, the street preacher is a part.
Mhm.
Never tell him to keep his mouth shut. He's
Right.
preaching a person who I will never be able to preach. A person walking the street. But in keeping with the topic for today, that's not a good approach to a post-podcast.
Yeah.
You will turn a post-podcast around.
Certainly. Again, because you don't know who's there. He could be anybody walking there.
Go with what Paul did in Acts 17, which is a very pertinent chapter in this question of post-podcast. He met them where they were. In
He
other
did.
words, when you start reasoning, you do not start with what you have. You
Start
with what they
with
have.
where they are. Exactly.
So to a postmodernist, you cannot start with Jesus.
Right.
You have to start with his idea of his worldview. And so use his terms of idea. For example,
Exactly.
can I give an example?
Yes.
Okay. They say that you should not have a worldview but bits and pieces which are themselves supposed to be in one corner and in another corner. But that itself is a worldview.
Correct.
So postmodernism is saying that you should not have a worldview while it is based on a worldview. It's a very self-repeating concept.
Correct.
So when I've spoken to them, and I said, aren't you repeating yourself? How many
Right.
statements do you say is only supposed to be relatively true? Every statement. Well, that's an absolute truth.
Right.
So you are
Exactly.
using an absolute truth, using an absolute truth to destroy absolute truth. That is
I know. Yeah. There's a total contradictions in their thing. Absolute. To say there's no absolute truth is an absolute truth.
So when you are friends with them, it's like this. And those audience will be able to see.
Yes. I haven't heard from you yet.
Sometimes we have to be careful with the assumptions that we make of people, like put them in a certain worldview. For instance, I'll have to
Mhm.
that are the most open to the reception of the gospel. So to eliminate the thought that it's great controversy will not come. So I can't use this something. I think we have to be careful to.
I'm not saying you can't use the great controversy. Again, that's my own opinion. I'm just saying I'm talking about effectiveness and not talking about anything in the great controversy whatsoever. Talking about the presentation of that term. And
I'm just saying to you that the thought that we may not choose that
well, again, wouldn't it take individual talking to each person? You know, I think that's what you're saying. Is you're saying, you know, if you're afraid that we're going to just totally block people, the whole idea of learning different worldviews is just to get an idea of where they may be coming from, because there's always individualistic. Even though someone may be a monotheist, they're certainly going to have all kind of perceptions of monotheism. Even within Seventh-day Adventism, I could talk to every person here, and boy, I could get all kind of answers. Exactly. Exactly. And what is your name? David. Okay. So in other words, David, if you and I were talking, I would have to talk to David, you know, and not monotheistic Seventh-day Adventist, you know, or talking to me. Not I'm Steve, by the way. And you'd have to talk to Steve and not generic Seventh-day Adventist or whatever. I think that's what you're saying. It's just really, and that's the point I want to get across as well. I agree with you on that it's got to be mono. Yes, ma'am.
Part of this church this morning, and one of the things that was brought out in the sermon, the husband here yet, the relational part of witnessing. And if we are led by the Holy Spirit and our desire to share the love that we have from God with somebody that we've come to care for, and they know that, I think God leads us down the right approach, and the person can feel our care for them, and that's what opens doors for the gospel. It's
Right.
that connection.
That connection, a relationship is the open thing. It's not like, I know we're not talking about talking to someone at a bus stop. You know, it's people in our lives, and that's why I did hear that also this morning. And that was the very key point is it's people within our lives that we have every day, not generic people we run into one time. It's not a one-time dog and pony show. Yes, sir.
I think it's important to remember that I'm not always me. Either. The way I am today is not the way I am always. If you're dealing with somebody who is postmodernist, conservative, or whatever, the Holy Spirit can lead you to a time when they lose a job, when their parent dies, when they have a child born.
Yep.
These are times where we all know that a person is more receptive to the gospel, to God, something like that.
Exactly. Yes.
Just as a point.
Okay.
I'm guilty of this too. When somebody asks me a question, I'm there to, not realizing the person's worldview or background, I'm ready to give an answer from the Bible. And I think I need to learn from Jesus always to question the question.
Yes, question the questions.
You've got about 2 minutes left.
I got about 2 minutes left. Okay, that's the way it always works. You never get through everything. And just some of the other things to think about is, what do you see are some of the biggest challenge or most effective methods of witnessing to postmodernistic individual? We've already talked, really, a lot of the responses today cater to that. And what would also be the most effective witnessing technique for Darwinists that you deal with, or pantheist. And the final thought is thinking in terms of what do you think would make us more effective as ambassadors of Christ within our local community. So that's just some thoughts. So certainly something to be done, and we've talked about our that Christ has asked us to carry forth the Great Commission, and it's not just telling someone facts and data, but what we're talking about is a living relationship with a living God who we believe is truth and reality, who we believe is this magi that can tell us in this world what we're grasping, and that can help us find the way, the coherence, the answer that fits life. And seeking to our pathway of duty, I want to just share this last thing with you. It's from Robert E. Lee. He was at West Point in 1852, and he wrote to his son this little letter. In regard to duty, let me in conclusion of this hasty letter inform you that nearly 100 years ago there was a day of remarkable gloom and darkness, still known as the dark day, a day when the light of the sun was slowly extinguished as if by an eclipse. The legislature of Connecticut was in session, and its members saw the unexpected and unaccountable darkness coming on. They shared in the general awe and terror. It was supposed by many that the last day, the day of judgment, had come. Someone in the consternation of the hour moved an adjournment. Then there arose an old Puritan legislator, Davenport of Stamford, and said that if the last day had come, he desired to be found at his place doing his duty, and therefore moved that candles be brought in, so that the house could proceed with its duty. There was quietness in that man's mind, the quietness of heavenly wisdom and inflexible willingness to obey present duty. Duty, then, is the sublimest word in our language. Do your duty in all things like the old Puritan. You cannot do more, and you should never wish to do less. Sam, would you close us out for prayer, please?
Thank you, Heavenly Father, for our here this morning, and as we go out into the community, may we have a desire to share the gospel of Jesus Christ. Let us know as we go through another service and go back home, may you be with us in Jesus' name. Remember, next week is a change in gears. We've got 4 sessions of as to why Adventist young people are leaving the church. Thereafter, followed by 1 week of paleontology by Dr. Lee Spencer, and then a 7-week presentation by Dr. Hassel, archaeology and the Bible. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Sam. Appreciate that.